Hello everyone, and I'm here at the George Bush Library in College Station, Texas for the burial site of George H.W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, 41st President of the United States, served from 1989 to 1993. Today I'm going to explore the library, and then afterwards I'm going to give you a tour of his grave site and kind of go through a little biography of his life and accomplishments and why he's important to history, and obviously screaming his name for smash as well. So I'm going to go through the library on my own, and then I'm going to tell you what I think about it, and then we're going to go see the gravesite. So we just walked outside the library. The library was great. I highly recommend it. Right here is the Bush Pond. I thought I'd show in the walk back to the grave. They said it was about a 10 to 12 minute walk. We're probably going to do a little bit faster because I walk fast, but this is actually part of the Texas A&M University here in College Station, Texas. This is the Bush School. They have the Bush School of Government and Public Service here at this university, which is really cool, named after President Bush. Got this shirt here too, which is really nice. Right here on the side, we have a quote from Bush. "Let future generations understand the burden and blessings of freedom. Let them say we stood where duty required us to stand." So that's really cool. Bush was a very inspiring president. I think he's very well respected, and yeah. He's actually the most recent president to serve who has passed away. He passed away in 2018. I was 11 years old when he passed away. He was the first president to die of my lifetime. I just thought I'd put this in here because they just put this new exhibit in 2024 to celebrate his 100th birthday. What would have been his 100th birthday? This is the Bush 4141 locomotive that they brought his body back here when he died in 2018. So it says George Bush 41. They built it in 2005, and George Bush was actually able to ride on it and stuff, so it's really cool. 41st president, and this is Marine One. Really cool. It's really shiny. It says United States of America right there. So George Herbert Walker Bush was born on June 12, 1924 in Massachusetts. He grew up around the area in New England. He was actually not from Texas. He moved down to Texas after he graduated college to get into the oil industry. Before that, he served in World War II and enlisted at the age of 18, and he became, at age 18, the youngest Navy pilot in the U.S. military at the time, which is very interesting. He served throughout World War II in the Pacific Theater, which is really cool. They had some of his World War II relics in there and things like that. After he served in the war, came back and went to college at Yale. He was on the baseball team there. He graduated in 1948. After that, he moved to Odessa, Texas, which is where he lived the rest of his life. He married Barbara Bush, and he had a bunch of kids, one of which was future President George W. Bush in 1946. He actually had him still up in New England, but he had a lot of kids. Later on, in 1953, he founded the what would later become the Zapata Petroleum Corporation, which was an oil business. He understood. Bush was a smart guy, and he understood the growing oil business in Texas. That's why he came down here to get a job and to really harness that and take advantage of that. And so eventually his dad, Prescott Bush, in 1952 ran for senator up in Connecticut, which he won. And so he won from there, and the Bush family was prominent in wealth and everything, but his father, Prescott Bush, ended up becoming a senator, which definitely helped Bush's credibility, George Bush's credibility later. And he campaigned and spoke for Dwight Eisenhower during the 50s in Texas, 1950s, which is why he associates himself with the Republican Party as well. Later on, in 1966, he was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in Texas. And so he served there for about 2 terms, and eventually was appointed to several positions during Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford's presidencies. They highly viewed Bush and kind of rose to prominence. He served as ambassador to the UN under Richard Nixon for a little bit. And then under Ford, he was the most prominently the CIA director in 1976 and 77. And he was actually seen as a potential candidate for Gerald Ford's vice president when Nixon resigned, but Ford ultimately chose Nelson Rockefeller. And then Bush got the CIA director position, which was honestly more powerful anyway. And so he became a huge name in the Republican Party. Afterwards, 1980, Ronald Reagan chose George Bush to be his running mate in the election, which Ronald Reagan defeated incumbent Jimmy Carter in pretty much a landslide. Everybody loved Ronald Reagan, and George Bush ended up serving 2 terms as vice president under Ronald Reagan from 1981 to 1989, and then eventually defeated Michael Dukakis in 1988 for his own presidency, his own term. So he served as vice president for 2 terms and president for 1 term, and took office in 1989. There we go. One thing to note, if you guys are ever interested in visiting this place, the grave is open during museum hours only, but you do not have to pay for the grave. You could probably just walk back here. You do have to pay for the museum, but you do not have to see the museum to see the gravesite. So if you're just interested in seeing the grave, you do not have to pay. The museum's only $12, and it was really cool, so I recommend it. So here's the gravesite of George Bush and Barbara Bush, First Lady. Bush, in my opinion, was a very successful president abroad. He took office in 1989, and one of the biggest things he's remembered for is the first Gulf War in 1990. Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in August of 1990. George Bush initiated 2 operations of the UN coalition known as Operation Desert Shield and Operation Desert Storm, which together lasted a few months. Eventually was successful until we went back to Iraq about 10 years later, but for the time, it was very successful. Another successful military campaign he did was Operation Just Cuz in 1990 was what it was called. And an invasion to overthrow the general government of Panama at the time, to overthrow General Noriega, who was the president of Panama and running a corrupt government. In 1990, George Bush put that down. It was called Operation Just Cuz. So that was very successful as well. Domestically, George Bush did some great things. The Americans with Disabilities Act was signed during his presidency, ending discrimination amongst disabled people. He also established the Clean Air Act's amendments, which put in regulations on air quality in places in public facilities and things like that. Was very good. One of the biggest criticisms, though, George Bush gets was his campaign was ran on read my lips, no new taxes. About 2 years into his presidency, he signed what is called the Budget Reconciliation Act, which the goal was to lower the country's deficit, but ended up raising individual income tax by about 12%, and was most likely led to him not being reelected in 1992, and he ended up losing to the very young Bill Clinton. And also, some people argue that Ross Perot, the third-party candidate in the Reform Party, took votes away from George Bush. Well, the election was pretty close. But abroad, George Bush was very successful. Domestically, he was not as successful. As kind of a mixed bag, but I think he did some great things, though, and he's definitely one of the better presidents. Additionally, what I think is George Bush's greatest achievement was he won the Cold War. Yes, the Soviet Union collapsed during his presidency in 1991. He was also president when the Berlin Wall fell and ended a string of almost 8 to 9 presidents fighting the Cold War. George Bush won the Cold War for the United States, and I think that is an amazing thing for our country, and an amazing thing to look back on for his presidency, and is honestly the biggest noteworthy thing that happened during Bush's administration. Only president for 1 term, and actually when George Bush took office, he succeeded Ronald Reagan. They are both Republican presidents, and that's actually the last time in U.S. history that 2 succeeding administrations, back-to-back administrations, were from the same political party. Ever since, in the last 32 years, every presidency has been from a different political party, back-to-back, which is very interesting as well. And he's the last president to only serve 1 term until Joe Biden, so pretty interesting. So Pauline Bush is in here as well. I guess that was his daughter, only lived to be 4 years old, or less than 4, 3 She died in 1953. And then we got George H.W. Bush. He would be 101 today if he was still alive. And then Barbara over there, she was born in 1925. And there's George Bush, 41st President of the United States, kind of a military cross right there. Obviously, he was a World War II pilot, so. All right, now we're going to scream his name for Smash. George H.W. Bush for Smash! All right, guys, so with that, thank you guys for watching. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe. We'll see you guys next time. Goodbye. Wah.